Hello， 大家好。
大家好。
又到我哋讀你聽嘅時間，我哋繼續讀 Dickens 嘅 Great Expectations 啊。OK？
係。
咁我哋讀到第幾節啊
28。
28啦，我哋第27次錄音28節。咁啊讀到28節嘅故事啊，發展到咩位啊？
發展到咩位啊？發展到咧，阿 Pip 咧同阿 Jo 咧見面。咁然後本來佢都好唔想見到佢啊，好 negative 咁樣嘅。
點解唔想見到阿 Jo 啊？
因為覺得佢好低下。
係啊，冇錯。
覺得佢着嗰啲衫又
同埋佢主要係佢唔想俾人知道
佢個過去。
係啊，冇錯。
咁但係後來又發展到又變成咧，因為阿 Jo 又講話，其實佢都知道佢會咁諗啊，佢覺得佢自己唔係
佢阿 Jo 從來冇話佢會咁諗。
佢知道自己個身世。
阿 Jo 只係自己講出佢自己嘅諗法啫。阿 Jo 係一個咁嘅人。
咁搞到咧，阿 Pip 咧，到佢走嗰陣時，阿 Pip 咧追出去咁樣咯。
追出去啊？
有啊。
OK， 我唔知有冇追出去，總之佢有出去啦。
點知佢都已經唔見咗啦，咁樣。係啦。超 sad 咁啊！突然間又。
即係我覺得有啲茫然若失啦。我又唔可以話佢好內疚啊、痛哭啊，佢又冇去到咁嘅程度。即係畢竟佢個人都變咗啦。阿 Pip 啊，咁但係即係我好肯定阿 Pip， 即係阿 Jo 嗰啲真誠嘅發自內心嘅講話，譬如咩 God bless you 啊呢啲乜嘢咧，
打動。
即係其實我肯定阿 Pip 嘅內心係有少少慚愧嘅。但係個程度係去到幾多嘅啫，即係可能有少少咯，有啲多。
Stella 唔知點樣。係
啦，其實主要阿 Jo 要見阿 Pip 嘅原因係咩先？你都冇講，就係要話俾佢聽。
Stella 翻咗嚟啦。係
啦 ，Stella 翻咗嚟。咁其實係咪暗示俾阿 Pip 聽佢係Stella 想見佢咧，定係純粹話佢翻嚟即係你去見佢咧？定係其實係 Stella 想見佢咧？
定係冇嘢咧？
即係
純粹聽下咧。
即係以我嘅判斷，以我嘅睇法，就似乎應該係有放話出去嘅。應該可能 reception 或者邊個有放話出去，想佢哋知嘅。即係想，其實係即係好間接地想阿 Pip 去見佢嘅。就唔係完全係得個知字嘅，應該係咁。好啊，睇下啦，好唔好？呢啲我嘅猜測啊，因為即係距離上一次讀呢篇嘢一段時間啦。Okay, Chapter 28. It was clear that I must repair to our town next day, and in the first flow of my repentance, it was equally clear that I must stay at Joe's. But when I had secured my box place by tomorrow's coach, and had been down to Mr. Pocket's and back, I was not by any means convinced on the last point, and began to invent reasons and make excuses for putting up at the Blue Ball. Blue Ball 即係嗰啲又係嗰啲bar 定 public house. I should be an inconvenience at Joe's. I was not expected, and my bed would not be ready. I should be too far from Miss Havisham's, and she was expecting and might not like it. All other swindlers upon earth are nothing to the self-swindlers, and with such pretenses did I cheat myself. Surely a curious thing, that I should innocently take a bad half-crown of somebody else's manufacture is reasonable enough, but that I should knowingly reckon the spurious coin of my own make as good money. An obliging stranger, under pretense of compactly folding up my banknotes for security's sake, abstracts the notes and gives me nutshells. But what is his sleight of hand to mine when I fold up my own nutshells and pass them on myself as notes? 哇，唔知佢寫乜啫。Having settled that I must go to the Blue Ball。Blue Ball 係咪嗰個 public house 啊，定係嗰個 bar 定唔知咩？My mind was much disturbed by indecision whether or not to take the Avenger.
咩啊？咩 Avenger？
唔知喎，要睇一睇喎。 It was tempting to think of that expensive mercenary publicly airing his boots in the archway of the Blue Boar's posting yard. It was almost solemn to imagining him casually produced in the tailor's shop and confounding the disrespectful senses of Trapp's boy. On the other hand, Trapp's boy, Trap 應該係嗰個裁縫定唔知邊個啊嘛？邊個就係 Trapp's boy might worm himself into his intimacy and tell him things, or reckless and desperate wretch as I knew he could be, might hoot him in the high street. My patroness too might hear of him and not approve. On the whole, I resolved to leave the Avenger behind. 唔肯定 Avenger 係邊個？
冇聽過啊。
It was the afternoon coach by which I had taken my place, and as winter had now come round, I should not arrive at my destination until 2 or 3 hours after dark. Our time of starting from the Cross Keys was 2 o'clock. I arrived on the ground with a quarter of an hour to spare, attended by the Avenger, if I may connect that expression with one who never attended on me if he could possibly help it. At that time, it was customary to carry convicts down to the dockyards by stagecoach, as I had often heard of them in the capacity of outside passengers, and had more than once seen them on the high road dangling their iron legs over the coach roof. I had no cause to be surprised when Herbert, meeting me in the yard, came up and told me there were 2 convicts going down with me, but I had a reason that was an old reason now for constitutionally faltering whenever I heard the word convict. "You don't mind them, Handel?" said Herbert. "Oh, no. I thought you seemed as if you didn't like them." "I can't pretend that I do like them, and I suppose you don't particularly, but I don't mind them." "See, there they are," said Herbert, "coming out of the tap. What a degraded and vile sight it is." They had been treating their guard, I suppose, for they had a gaoler with them, and all 3 came out wiping their mouths on their hands. The 2 convicts were handcuffed together and had irons on their legs, irons of a pattern that I knew well. They wore the dress that I likewise knew well. Their keeper had a brace of pistols and carried a thick-knobbed bludgeon under his arm, but he was on terms of good understanding with them, and stood with them beside him, looking on at the putting to of the horses, rather with an air as if the convicts were an interesting exhibition not formally open at the moment, and he the curator. One was a taller and stouter man than the other, and appeared as a matter of course, according to the mysterious ways of the world, both convict and free, to have had allotted to him the smallest suit of clothes. His arms and legs were like great pincushions of those shapes, and his attire disguised him absurdly. But I knew his half-closed eye at one glance. There stood the man whom I had seen on the saddle at the 3 Jolly Bargemen on a Saturday night, and who had brought me down with his invisible gun. It was easy to make sure that, as yet, he knew me no more than if he had never seen me in his life. He looked across at me, and his eye appraised my watch chain, and then he incidentally spat and said something to the other convict, and they laughed and slewed themselves round with a clink of their coupled manacle, and looked at something else. The great numbers on their backs, as if they were street doors, their cause mangy and gamely out of service, as if they were low animals, their iron legs apologetically garlanded with pocket handkerchiefs, in a way in which all present looked at them and kept from them, made them a most disgraceful and degraded spectacle. But this was not the worst of it. It came out that the whole of the back of the coach had been taken by a family removing from London, and that there were no places for the 2 prisoners but on the seat in front behind the coachman. Hereupon, a choleric gentleman, who had taken the 4th place on that seat, flew into a most violent passion, and said that it was a breach of contract to mix them up with such villainous company, and that it was poisonous and pernicious and infamous and shameful, and I don't know what else. At this time the coach was ready and the coachman impatient, and we were all preparing to get up, and the prisoners had come over with their keeper, bringing with them that curious flavour of bread poultice baize, rope yarn, and hearthstone, which attends the convict presence. "Don't take it so much amiss, sir," pleaded the keeper to the angry passenger. I'll sit next you myself. I'll put them on the outside of the row. They won't interfere with you, sir. You needn't know they're there. And don't blame me," growled the convict I had recognized. "I don't want to go. I am quite ready to stay behind. As far as I'm concerned, anyone's welcome to my place." "Or mine," said the other gruffly. "I wouldn't have incommoded none of you if I had my way." Then they both laughed and began cracking nuts and spitting the shells about, as I really think I should have liked to do myself if I had been in their place and so despised. At length, it was voted that there was no help for the angry gentleman, and that he must either go in his chance company or remain behind. So he got into his place, still making complaints, and the keeper got into the place next him, and the convicts hauled themselves up as well as they could, and the convict I had recognized sat behind me with his breath on the hair of my head. "Goodbye, Handel," Herbert called out as we started. I thought what a blessed fortune it was that he had found another name for me than Pip. It is impossible to express with what acuteness I felt the convict's breathing, not only on the back of my head, but all along my spine. The sensation was like being touched in the marrow with some pungent and searching acid. It set my very teeth on edge. He seemed to have more breathing business to do than another man, and to make more noise in doing it. And I was conscious of growing high-shouldered on one side in my shrinking endeavors to fend them off. The weather was miserably raw, and the two cursed the cold. It made us all lethargic before we had gone far, and when we had left the halfway house behind, we habitually dozed and shivered and were silent. I dozed off myself in considering the question whether I ought to restore a couple of pounds sterling to this creature before losing sight of him, and how it could best be done. In the act of dipping forward as if I were going to bathe among the horses, I woke in a fright and took the question up again. But I must have lost it longer than I had thought, since, although I could recognize nothing in the darkness and the fitful lights and shadows of my lamps, I traced marsh country in the cold damp wind that blew at us. Cowering forward for warmth and to make me a screen against the wind, the convicts were closer to me than before. The very first words I heard them interchange as I became conscious were the words of my own thought. 2 1-pound notes. "How did he get them?" said the convict I had never seen. "How should I know?" returned the other. "He had them stowed away somehow. Give him my friends, I expect." "I wish," said the other with a bitter curse upon the code, "that I am there. 2 1-pound notes, or friends, 2 1-pound notes. I'll sell all my friends I ever had for one, and think it a blessed good bargain." "Well, so he says." "So he says," resumed the convict I had recognized. "It was all said and done in half a minute, behind a pile of timber in the dockyard. You're going to be discharged." "Yes, I was." "Would I found out that boy had fed him and kept a secret and give him them 2 1-pound notes? Yes, I would, and I did." "More fool you," growled the other. "I'd have spent them on a man in victuals and drink. He must have been a green one. Mean to say he knowed nothing of you?" "Not a ha'porth. Different gangs and different ships. He was tried again for prison breaking and got made a lifer. And was that honor the only time you worked out in this part of the country?" "The only time." "What might have been your opinion of the place?" "A most beastly place. Mudbank, mist, swamp, and work, swamp, mist, and mudbank." They both execrated the place in very strong language, and gradually growled themselves out, and had nothing left to say. 呢度似乎係講返阿 Pip 最開始遇到嗰個 convict， 佢識得佢嘅喎，即係講返佢嗰啲事蹟。After overhearing this dialogue, I should assuredly have got down and been left in the solitude and darkness of the highway, but for feeling certain that the man had no suspicion of my identity. Indeed, I was not only so changed in the course of nature, but so differently dressed and so differently circumstanced, that it was not at all likely he could have known me without accidental help。即係呢個直情係嗰個人嚟嘅喎，即係其中之一個啦，其中之一個犯啦。咁咪即係有見過阿 Pip 嘅，但係阿 Pip 即係好放心啦。呢一刻叫做，因為佢個外形已經唔同咗，同佢大個仔咗，係咪？Still, the coincidence of our being together on the coach was sufficiently strange to fill me with a dread that some other coincidence might at any moment connect me, in his hearing, with my name. For this reason, I resolved to alight as soon as we touched the town, and put myself out of his hearing. This device I executed successfully. My little portmanteau was in the boot under my feet. I had put to turn a hinge to get it out. I threw it down before me, got down after it, and it was left at the first lamp on the first stones of the town pavement. As to the convicts, they went their way with the coach, and I knew at what point they would be spirited off to the river. In my fancy, I saw the boat with its convict crew waiting for them at the slime-washed stairs. Again heard the gruff, "Give way, you," like an order to dogs. Again saw the wicked Noah's Ark lying out on the black water. I could not have said what I was afraid of, for my fear was altogether undefined and vague. But there was great fear upon me. As I walked on the hotel, I felt that a dread, much exceeding the mere apprehension of a painful or disagreeable recognition, made me tremble. I am confident that it took no distinctness of shape, and that it was the revival for a few minutes of the terror of childhood. The coffee room at the Blue Boar was empty, and I had not only ordered my dinner there, but had sat down to it, before the waiter knew me. As soon as he had apologized for the remissness of his memory, he asked me if he should send boots for Mr. Pumblecook. "No," said I, "certainly not." The waiter appeared surprised, and took the earliest opportunity of putting a dirty old copy of a local newspaper so directly in my way that I took it up and read his paragraph. Our readers will learn, not altogether without interest, in reference to the recent romantic rise in fortune of a young artificer in iron of his neighbourhood, that the youth's earliest patron, companion, and friend was a highly respected individual not entirely unconnected with the corn and seed trade, and whose eminently convenient and commodious business premises are situate within 100 miles of the High Street. It is not wholly irrespective of our personal feelings that we record him as the mentor of our young Telemachus, for it is good to know that our town produced the founder of the latter fortunes. Does the thought-contracted brow of the local sage or the lustrous eye of local beauty inquire whose fortunes? We believe the quainton Metzys was the blacksmith of Antwerp. Verb sap. I entertain a conviction, based upon large experience, that if in the days of my prosperity I had gone to the North Pole, I should have met somebody there, wandering Eskimo or civilized men, who would have told me that Pumblecook was my earliest patron and the founder of my fortunes. 即係呢個係 Pumblecook 寫嘅嘢啦。即係講到，即係 Pumblecook 好似即係喺度講到佢自己同呢個 Pip 嘅關係非常深厚啊咁樣。即係講到冇當日冇佢咧，就冇阿 Pip 噶啦咁。登晒大字報。
呢扯關係。
係啦，咁其實呢一段嘢就係講咩？就係講阿 Pip 真係要翻去咯，去揾阿 Estella 咯。但係佢揾佢翻嘅路上咧，又俾佢遇到有兩個 convict，永遠都係咁巧嘅。即係當日佢救嗰兩個 convict咧，終於又係要見翻之前其中之一個見過啦，佢已經變咗有錢人啦。另外呢個咧又遇咗佢，因為佢當日遇咗兩個。一個就係同佢傾偈，另一個就係唔睬佢。今日遇到呢個就應該就係唔睬佢嗰個嚟，咁咯。Anyway， 其中之一個就發現咗佢㗎啦， 即係佢幫過嗰個。今日呢個咧就係冇睬佢嗰個，咁但係最尾佢都唔知道嗰個係阿 Pip，因為阿 Pip 已經變咗，係啦，外形已經唔同。好嘛，咁我哋就再睇下之後啦，會發生咩事啦？翻到鄉下同 Estella 嘅互動。
都好模糊喎，其實呢個係咪？
係因為呢個第一段實在寫得太難明。好嘛，咁我哋睇埋之後啦，睇下同 Estella 之間啊 ，Miss Havisham 會變成點啦，好嘛？好，下次再講，拜拜。